Hi, folks. My name is Byron Komanek, owner and manager of Jack Solar Garden here in Boulder County, Colorado, and the director of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, uh, da, da, where we showcase what you can do with agrivoltaics, from having a variety of opportunities for people to come out to our solar array on regular tours. We have public tours every other weekend during the summer through end of October this season, and then we'll start back up next season if you haven't been out here before. It's about a 75-minute or so tour with an enthusiastic tour guide, no matter who they are. We have a variety of parties. We just had our end of season event out here with oh man, some great food, vegetables cooked up from underneath the panels. A few of my sheep that had grazed under the panels were joined the menu. Lovely drinks and fun opportunities to network. We brought out dairy cows this season for both of our two workshops that we've had on the field. If you're interested in getting a more in-depth understanding of agrivoltaics, a la Jack Solar Garden, you can take a look for, let's see, we'll probably post those maybe January or February of 2025 for which ones will be, what time of year we'll be doing the ones in that growing 2025 growing season. You can see there of the cows as well as the seating arrangements that we have for the workshop. Plus, just trying to showcase everything else that's possible, from different types of equipment, animals, crops, perennials, so forth. If you go to our website, you'll see a variety of links from videos that help to describe this to different papers that we're starting to publish. That just gives our thoughts on different fact sheets around select pieces of information. As I mentioned, hosting events, we've had some good times. We had a steel drum marching band, Batteria Alegria, from a Brazilian samba band that came out to play this summer underneath the panels. The acoustics, it's fun. If y'all haven't played with the acoustics within a solar array, especially when the panels are flat, and just the music bounces under the panels, it's cool to see. And we've had a variety of events with 100 to 150 people coming out, hanging out, enjoying the space in our solar array, eating our food. We've done a variety of different webinars, like the last one we had here with the University of Arizona folks. And we are not just virtual, but we are doing more in-person things. So if you happen to be on the Front Range of Colorado, especially this evening, we are going to be presenting an agrivoltaic seminar up at Fort Collins on the Colorado State University campus, where the speakers shown here will be talking about various aspects of the solar development side, because agrivoltaics doesn't work without solar. A lot of people seem to struggle with that at times, but you have to have the solar with agriculture. Otherwise, it's just one or the other. But to be able to do the two together, we need to learn how to do each one separately well, and then you can combine them. So part of the idea is how do we teach more folks about the solar industry as they get interested in agrivoltaics? All of this is important because our governments are starting to define the words that we use, are putting regulations around this type of work, and are also providing grant funding to it. We will have Emily Evans of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory at the end of this webinar pop on to talk about the Large Animal and Solar Systems Operations Prize that was just put out this season. But there's been a lot of other funding opportunities, and there continue to be more funding opportunities. And the more information that we can get out there for policymakers to better understand what agrivoltaics is, what it is not, that all helps us with being able to provide more societal benefits by improving the land stewardship within solar arrays. Today's webinar is all about cattle within solar arrays. We've had, I think, 3 different times we've brought cows out here just for a handful of hours each time to see what they would do within a solar array. And from my experience, the animals just put their head down and eat. Once in a while, they'll scratch their head on a post, and it doesn't cause as much ruckus within the solar array as a 10-mile or even 20-mile-an-hour wind event going through that shakes all of our solar panels. Whereas a cow scratching its head on the post, you could barely hear it other than the cow enjoying itself on the panel on the steel I-beam. But we have Bradley Hines from the University of Minnesota, Stephen Herbert from University of Massachusetts Amherst, Josh Bennett of EDF Renewables, and Brent Hua of Hua Enterprises and Hua Cattle. Each of these folks have been considering cattle within solar arrays or having experience with these animals underneath solar panels for some years. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what they have to say. But before we pass it on to Brad here, I'll just highlight this is our Agrivoltaic seminar series. I love this this artwork that we have for it, and I highly encourage other folks to find local artists to help depict what it is that you're doing within solar arrays, especially if you haven't done it yet, to show potential for collaborations. And oftentimes people have a hard time understanding what's possible until they see it themselves. So that's where art comes in. And if you want to find this recording, it will be up on our website, as you see there, at in about a week from now. So from there, last logistics for this. Sorry, Brad. If you have questions, please put it into the Q&A. Our speakers will be responding to some of the more direct ones, potentially during other people's presentations. But if there's a more interesting discussion question, we'll hold that off until the end. So our speakers will go from now until roughly 2 o'clock or 1 hour or 50 minutes from now. Then we'll have easily 20 to 30 minutes where we'll have opportunities to answer your questions live on here. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop share. Brad, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, thanks for inviting me to speak about our agrivoltaics work at the University of Minnesota. And we've been sort of working on this for about 8 years now, where we first started that. You know, sort of this is our research center. So we have about a 300 cow dairy and renewable energy program in west central Minnesota. And you know, our sort of goal was, you know, can we green egg production systems? And so this was the original project that I sort of dreamed up about 8 years ago. There was, you know, some ground mounts around, and it's like, well, why can't we raise them up? I saw people raising sheep underneath solar panels. We don't have any sheep at our research center. So it's like, well, why can't we raise up the panels? Maybe like they do with carports, and put cows underneath. So that was the goal. Our plan was also to have our solar power charge or provide power for an electric fast charging system. So that's what we did. And we put up a DC fast charger, was the one of the few fast chargers in Western Minnesota at the time. So that's what our goal was. So this is, again, our research center. We've started with many different solar installations, like a lot of people. You know, we put them on barns. You can see in the left picture, there's some solar panels on some pig barns. You know, that's where we started 10+ years ago. You know, in my mind, not necessarily agrivoltaics. That's just putting solar on buildings. But then the picture on the right was our first 50 kW. You know, so I should say that we have we're doing this on a small scale. You know, a lot of this is demonstration, proof of concept research to see what it is. You know, we are in by no means 4, 5, or 50, 60 megawatts. So we are seeing if we can make things happen. And so that was our first 50 kW solar installation. It was raised 8 feet above the ground, just to see what we could do. Some of the other installations, before I get there, we also have a 30 kW ground mount system here, like a lot of people do. You know, you see sheep being grazed with these systems a lot. I'm going to fence this off and put cows there once they get done with harvest this fall, and see what would happen. You know, everything's exposed. I don't believe in my mind that I'll have many issues, but this is sort of again, proof of concept, what we can see and what we can do. So that was where we were, you know. So this is kind of in spring of 2018. This is where we were. This is what our pasture looked like. You know, we're a grazing dairy, so the cows are outside. And it's like, well, how do we incorporate renewable energy into our dairy farm, where, you know, our goal is to make our farm net zero. So this is the pasture that we set out to sort of design to see what we could do. So here we are. This is in the spring. You saw the picture before. That was the cows. This is the early sort of summer 2018, where we started building our panels. Now, these are fixed panels. They are not bifacial at all. You know, this was 8 years ago. So we designed this system ourselves with the poles. We concreted the poles into the ground 6 feet because we weren't sure what the cows would do. You know, we wanted to sort of make everything cow-proof as possible because we just didn't know what was going to happen. The panels are on the far right-hand side, where you can see the panels are already up. That's 6 feet. And as we go, the ground is a little uneven, so it's 8 feet on the other side. So they're 6 to 8 feet in height. Our inverters are on the outside of the fence, so we tried to take that out of the equation and not have to think about how to fence the inverters, which some people are trying to figure that out. And so we put them on the outside of the fence. But this is sort of what it looks like. You know, in July of 2018, our system is all up. You can see there's a little bit of ground disturbance where we dug in the power lines to get them to the inverters. You know, there is some grass growing back, but we have our solar system. This is 30 kW. You know, this is what we started with funding, just to see if we could put cows underneath the panels and what sort of happened. So then we put the cows out there, and you're looking at this picture going, oh my gosh, what did he do? The cows are just gonna, you know, destroy whatever. Well, this is what happens when you have lots of rain. There's 120 cows in this picture. And you know, it is what it is. There was a lot of rain. The cows ate the grass down. They sort of mucked it all up, but that's maybe what we wanted to do, to be able to establish the grass and other forbs that are coming underneath the panels now. So by no means is this what it's going to look like, but I show this because it could happen if it rains a lot, then you put a lot of cows underneath a small system. But again, in the fall, the grass comes back, you plant some grass, everything looks nice, and no issues whatsoever. That was, you know, sort of summer. You know, this is in the fall. You can see there's no leaves on the trees, and the grass has grown back underneath the panels, and you don't even know that there was a single cow or lots of cows underneath that. And then as we have moved on to in the future, this was actually this summer. So this is 8 years after, or well, sorry, 6 years after we put the system up. You can see there's about 80 cows here. You know, some of the cows you can see are not underneath the panels. Some cows are underneath the panels. It just depends on where they want to be. You know, that's sort of the freedom. We allow the cows to graze, so there's extra land around that so they can graze, you know, outside of the panels, so they're not necessarily standing underneath the panels all the time. You know, this, in my mind, this is a shade structure for cows, and that's what it's used for. The cows will go there when they want to get out of the sunlight, you know, try to get away from flies, etc. So as time has gone on, you know, that was a 30 kW system. Well, now we have a 500 kW, so half a megawatt in our pastures. Actually just came online, and this was a little bit different sort of design. You know, these are steel H posts. We just put them into the ground, 6 feet, hammered them in. No concrete, no nothing. You know, we learned that we probably overbuilt the first system because we weren't sure what the cows would do. And here we are with that. And today, you know, these half of the system is sort of monofacial. The second half is bifacial, but this was the other day. So we got a lot of pregnant cows, etc., grazing underneath the panels. You can still see where they, the dirt is there from putting in power lines back to the inverters, which are on the outside of the fence. But This is, there's 100 cows or so underneath this system. You can see no disturbance by installing it. The cows love it. There's lots of grass that grows underneath. Actually, we've done some research studies. The grass actually grows quite well underneath the solar panels. And you can see sort of how big of a shadow the solar panels cast for these cows. They don't need to be directly underneath the solar panels. Some of these cows are 6-8 feet away from the solar panels and they're still getting access to shade. So this was the goal. These are not single axis tracking. The goal was to maximize energy production as well as shade production. So that's why we did that. Now, just a couple slides. So we did a study. So there is published research where we did using agrivoltaics in a pasture-based dairy system to shade cows to see what would happen. We looked at production. There was no difference in production of these cows just because these are fixed panels. Cows had access to non-shaded areas during certain times of the year as well. But when they had access to the shade from the solar panels, we saw that there was a big decrease in body temperature of cows. So this is in Celsius, but about 1 degree Fahrenheit, which really is able to reduce the heat stress of cows. So that's what our goal, reducing heat stress. The last few slides here. We've also explored growing a lot of forage and grain crops. You can see the list of everything, that's sort of the next thing. What can we grow underneath these panels? From grasses to legumes to alfalfa. We also have tried corn, oats, soybeans, and wheat. You can see some of these. This is underneath one of our certain panels. You can see the soybeans growing underneath there. We have oats. There is corn back there. For this solar panel, corn didn't do very well, at least for this design. But we have found that meadow fescue and orchard grass and red clover in a combination probably does the best, at least for our environment, for growing underneath solar panels. One of the last things here that we have decided to do was, there was a lot of talk, at least from farmers, what about off-grid agrivoltaics and shade systems? So this was sort of a demonstration. Can we do it? Can we, this is very different than what, some people might do. This is about 30 kilowatts of solar, all battery powered, it's stored in batteries. The tractor off to the right is an electric tractor. We have a Monarch electric tractor that's able to pull this around to the pasture. And you can see the cows are able to use this as a system. We can use this agrivoltaics and battery system for irrigation, powering a fencer, charging tractors. In the wintertime, we can use it for windbreaks. There's just lots of options that we see. And this is our new thing that we've just came online in the last few weeks. Kind of the last slide that I have here. This is kind of a vision of sort of future in agrivoltaics in cattle. What are the height of the panels? That's probably the number one question I get. What can we put it at? Ours are 6 to 8 feet. I have visions of grazing at 4 feet. You can see these vertical bifacial panels. I think that's a debate right now between farmers, researchers, solar developers. Will bifacial vertical panels produce enough energy like other single axis tracking systems? But we've been funded to put up a vertical bifacial system in our pasture to be able to do that. So, looking at different crops, what are the long-term implications of cattle and solar panels? And obviously we need more data out there that support that cattle don't wreck the panel. We have not had any issues with that. They just don't disturb things. They don't wreck them. We're producing power and have had no issues. So with that, if you'd like to learn more, or feel free to contact me or come out for a visit. I know a lot of people have come out for a visit, so I'd be happy to entertain any visitors. Well, thanks. Listen.
Thanks much there, Brett. I want to come out and visit. And so just to recap, you were talking about what was the lowest edge of solar panels that you had cows able to be around?
6 feet. 6 feet.
6 feet. Thank you very much. And Brad, there might be a few questions in the chat that you can easily answer, but more fun to expound upon. Leave those alone, and we'll deal with them later. But thank you very much, Brad. Stephen, are you ready, friend?
Yeah, if I can find where I
Find the
can share
buttons.
from. Somebody needs to stop first, I think.
Nope. I think we're looking at your screen, friend.
Oh, you're looking at my screen?
Yeah.
I got to get the slides up though.
Well, why don't you oh, there you go. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom. Perfect. You're all
Okay,
set.
I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts Stockwood School of Agriculture. And when I started this project, I was associate dean, so I had access to money, which was good. We know that we need to do something to keep our land in agriculture, and a local businessman came to me and said that he'd like to do a project, and I helped him design it at the university. We don't want this sort of thing, so we started that looking at some data. We said we have a lot of trees in Massachusetts, but if we wanted to get all electricity for Massachusetts from biomass, we'd need all of the land plus almost 25% more. Whereas for solar, we only need about 2.8%. So we set this site up as a test site. We had panels with variable spacings between the three panel clusters. And so the panels were installed 7.5 feet off the ground in 2010 when I was associate dean, and I came up with a lot of money from different places. The whole array, when we set it up, was close to $140,000, and it's much cheaper now, but back in 2010, nobody had done anything like this, what we were doing. So we used 8-inch diameter steel. We're down to 4-inch now. And we had spacings of 2 feet to 5 feet between the panel clusters. And we wanted to do it not with invasive means. Typically in our area, people were digging holes, placing a pole in, bracing it, and then filling it with concrete. We didn't want to do that, so we looked at driving these in, and there were no ways of doing that back in 2010 easily. So we came up with a system where we put a tractor on a truck and used a post pounder. Steel on steel was kind of deafening, and so we wouldn't recommend this to anybody. But now they use a system where they grab the pole and vibrate it in. So we rotationally grazed cattle under the panels. And my objective was not the cattle, it was more the quantification of the pasture yield between the grazing periods. And so we rotationally grazed, and we took samples on a 12-inch square and on a grid system, and then grouped those samples together to get our yields. In 2011, we had 5 samplings, and in 2012, we had 3. And we combined the samples. So in 2011, we had a dry spring, a wet summer, and somewhat of a dry fall. And so these were the 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, and no panel yields for each of the harvests in that year. In 2012, we only had 3 harvests. The spring was wet, and we had much higher yield in the spring. And we had drier summer and fall. On average, our yields increased as we went from 2 foot to 5 foot, and a little higher with no panel offering any shading, so no panel shading. What I want to, I don't know whether I have, yeah, I'll go back here a little, and I'll go back to the other slide. The concept of having gaps between panels allowed light to get through, and we wanted to know how much light would be of an advantage getting through to the pasture below. In the morning, the sun is in the east, it shines through the gap, and so on to the back of the panel that doesn't have shade. At noon, the sun is in front of the panels and it shades. In the afternoon, the sun is coming from the west, or the sunlight is coming from the west, and it again gives sunlight behind the panel and out to the east. And that's a concept that is important to understand when you have a solid mass of panels. All of the panels can get some sunlight. In fact, when we switched to growing vegetables, the gap between the panels was the same, or the yield behind the panel was the same yield as the gap between the panels. In other words, light was getting evenly distributed behind the panel and in between the panel. So I'll go back to a couple of slides to, oops, wrong way. So going back here, you see that the 4 foot and the 5 foot are nearly the same yield as the no panel. And so what we had, the cattle graze really well under the panels, and it's a good option, we felt, for keeping land in agriculture in Massachusetts. We don't have that much land for agriculture in Massachusetts, so we wanted to see what we could do to keep as much as we can. It's good for dairy and beef. It would work with sheep. I'm not sure about goats. If the panels were lower, they might climb. And I don't think it would work with equine, because we have a lot of equine in Massachusetts as well. They tend to rear up and might damage their heads on the panels. The 4 foot spacing gave us 90% of the yield compared to the non-shaded area, and the 5 foot similarly. So using the arrays we're now using them to array to evaluate vegetable growth, and all of this research is being funded by NRAL, who say this is still the only array similar to this for research. So that's my talk. Again, the cattle liked it. And just one slide to finish. The end is near, as we know it, and we feel fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And just quickly, as we have a little bit of time, did you ever find that the cows damaged any of the solar energy equipment?
No. They used to rub really hard against the panels. And if you wanted to drive a tractor into those 8-inch poles, which were in the ground 8 feet as well, and had braces on the side at the top, you would damage the tractor and you wouldn't damage the steel pole at all.
Yeah, I could get that. Well, appreciate you sharing that with us. I think you might have a couple questions in the chat there for you, friend. And we'll pass it off to Brent and Josh to round out our talk before hearing a little bit more about the LASSO program and then answering everybody's questions. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you, Byron, for giving us the opportunity to step in and have a brief conversation. Our concept here is power to protein, trying to evaluate some of the opportunities and challenges that we're facing. There we go. Essentially, we're going to try to figure out why is cattle such a big focus for us in the solar world, not just for us, but for cattle grazers as well. Focus on some of the key challenges and what we're thinking is going to be the proper way to get us to a successful cattle grazing operation. And then hopefully we'll have some time to get into frequently asked questions. Again, my name is Josh Bennett. I work for EDF Renewable Energy. We are a grid scale and distributed scale energy producer, both wind and solar. Yeah.
And I'm Brent Huwa. Yeah, pleasure to be with you all today. So basically, I'm a third generation farmer rancher. We've been in the reclamation civil business for over 20 years. So what's exciting for me is really going to take everything I'm passionate about, which is cattle, farming, and renewables, and put it all together with agrivoltaics and specifically with CattleVoltaics. So yeah, go ahead, Josh.
All right, back to you.
So here's kind of how it came to fruition for me. We've worked on over 80 utility scale projects, from new construction to veg maintenance. So we were on this particular site doing veg maintenance, and it was kind of ironic. The day before I was on this site, I was working with my wife, actually trying to figure out cattle pasture and hay. And here we are mowing a site. And so we're like, listen, there's got to be a better way. Why aren't we, haying this or grazing this? And so this particular site, very conducive to doing that. So that was kind of the aha moment for me about a year and a half ago. And so, yeah. Here's a test. This was at our office, just a little small test that we did. Those are Angus cattle, underneath the panel. So kind of started small with just a, few animals with some smaller arrays, and have moved on from there.
All right. So, for a solar developer, what is the motivation in some ways for trying to get into the world of cattle grazing? This graph really kind of captures exactly that. When you take a look at, the number of, basically what this is, when you remove CAFO operations and all of those operations that don't actually graze cattle, and you take the number of acres required to produce a megawatt of hay, or acres grazed by cattle to produce a megawatt of energy, excuse me, what you find is that there's really no limit to how much land is available for potential grazing and hay production. And the other thing that this kind of points out to me that's really important to me is that I operate in New York as a developer. The vast majority of the properties and lands and landowners I work with are either dairy operators or beef operators. This really allows me to meet the local agricultural economy where it's at, rather than try to introduce something that's not easily integrated. And from my perspective, I think that's really critical when we're doing especially large grid scale projects, to not disrupt local economies in ways that you don't necessarily have to. In addition, for solar benefits, the reality is when you do an overlay of land suitable for, agriculture as well as solar development, they're kind of the same. They're flat and easy to manage. So one huge benefit that getting access to grazing land provides us is reduced grading. And that ends up being, especially when you start moving projects out of the desert Southwest into states like New York and the Midwest, that is a huge, huge CapEx hit on a lot of our projects. Another critical one that folks don't really think about, if you're working with a large operation, you could potentially have 1 to 2 landowners. That means a critically shorter development timeline and a lot of cost savings, both legal and all the ways in which development costs drive up during that development process. It really does streamline it. I'm currently working on a project with over 40 landowners where we're still negotiating easements. Like a dream scenario for me is one landowner with 2,000 acres that is motivated to do it. Another thing that's starting to prove itself to be true is that you can potentially find a lower lease rate from your landowner. For them, if they can see overall land use optimization between the continued agricultural production joined with the solar lease, that is a great opportunity for them because it's building in this second stable revenue stream that allows them to kind of reinvest back into their farm. Another thing we're finding is that it really could lower our vegetation management costs. I won't speak too much to that because we haven't been able to prove that out, but we are finding that between a reduced lease rate and, basically between the reduced lease rate, either you're going to find that be the huge benefit, or at the end of the day, they're not going to expect, landowners or ranchers will not expect quite as much to manage the land because they're getting that additional revenue from their agricultural production. Another huge one, and I think all solar developers feel it, and is that across America, clean energy plants are facing huge opposition, and numerous projects at the end of the day have to be killed as a result of that opposition. So what does this do? When you go into a community with one of the biggest farmers who's supporting this operation, a solar project, because it's adding long-term viability to their farm, it really changes the local perception of that project. And the one thing that I think is vital at the end of the day, personally, and this is not against, mowing operations, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's any better land manager than someone that has generational understanding of that land, that soil, and has that kind of love and appreciation for that land and that soil, and a desire to see it be functional and useful from the very minute a project becomes operational. So our farmers really should be our best friends when it comes to overall long-term land management. This one here, this is actually a landowner at one of my projects. Let's keep in mind that I can't remember the exact statistic, but an absurdly high number of farmers have to take on secondary income to make ends meet. That has a huge and negative impact on quality of life, time spent with their family. And as I mentioned, being able to create a secondary revenue stream to allow some of my landowners the opportunity to have stable revenue that is not subject to market fluctuations, dairy price changes, drought, blight, and spend time with their family, take an actual vacation. That component of it really drives home for me. And I think it drives home for a lot of developers out there that are really focused on trying to work in this space. So, okay, how do we get there? There's a wide array of challenges. At the end of the day, my company is not ready to start having cattle graze. There are a lot of elements that they see as risk. Will it compromise structural integrity? Will it reduce overall project performance? Is it creating any new environmental constraints? Do we need to raise the panels? All of these things end up costing money and put project success at risk. And when I say that, we need to make sure when we design and build a project that it's going to be able to compete against a standard and more traditional solar site. And the reality right now is I don't see a path at this moment where it actually will compete against a standard solar site when it comes to winning a competitive bid. So we need to continue to work on how can we do this in a cost-effective way and really encourage those who are running these bid operations to provide added incentive for the incorporation of these kinds of agrivoltaic projects. All right. Now, again, how do we get there? This is really, this photo is resemblant of how we get there. In 2023, EDF brought over 17 employees, including head of our asset optimization team, multiple engineers. We brought our landowners from some of our projects. Here you also have farmers, you have Hua Enterprises, you have state legislators, you have me over in that weird corner sticking out like Where's Waldo, you have agronomists. Basically, what we did is we brought EDF to the ranch and we tried to collaborate and bring the right partners together to allow for a wide array of diversity of thought. We had breakout sessions where we literally sat down with blueprints, and started playing around with the design and refining it in a way that started to actually make sense. Make sense towards developing a site that could actually be done in a cost-effective method. Anything else to add about that particular meeting?
No, you did great.
All right. And what I'm excited about, and I'm very proud of EDF, as I said, I don't think we're ready for cattle grazing, but we are taking those steps required to get there. I don't know how many developers will bring this volume of people onto a site to really start to better understand the situation. And this slide really is kind of follow up on that. Internally, this doesn't even capture all of the various stakeholders that have to be like of the same mindset and willing to compromise in order to actually see this kind of take those next step forwards, because you have to deal with your engineering team. If your engineers aren't bought in, they're going to try to de-risk it through very expensive methods. And that's why we need our ranchers present. That's why we need insurance present. That's why we need engineering. We need our EPC partners present. So, and where did we land? Do you want to jump into this? Do you want me to start?
Go ahead, bud.
All right.
You're doing great.
All right. Where did we land? Right now, we feel like probably the most likely and effective way to do this at scale, oddly enough, doesn't require dramatic changes. We are looking at the potential of a 7-foot torque tube height. We need to make sure we keep our cables buried, avoid drive trains or drive lines, excuse me. I used to be a wind turbine mechanic, and I'm still stuck in drivetrain brain. We also will need to make sure that we allow enough space and clearance room for tractors to turn around. We need to make sure that we strategically place water and mineral supplies for cattle and to improve their health and keep them healthy in general. In addition, you're likely going to need, not likely, you'll need to protect your inverters and combiner boxes with some modest fencing. And we also landed on the rotational grazing. Do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. No problem. Yeah. So essentially the way we see it is that you can take a large site and rotationally graze, 10% of it over time. So at no time are you losing any particular level of energy production. And as of today, what we would envision is tabling the modules, like you see at the bottom of this slide. Tabling the modules guarantees that you have the amount of clearance for cattle to thrive and keep your infrastructure safe. That said, the more we're engaged in the space, the more we talk to people that actually graze cattle on sites, I don't necessarily think over the long haul, tabling modules will be necessary. I am not convinced that we will lose what we're kind of estimating around 2% of energy loss, estimating around 2% energy loss. I'm not convinced that that's real. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we are de-risking this internally to the point where we can actually get this done. And so what it does, it really leaves us a lot of upside. Any thoughts or additional?
No, that's great.
All right.
The only other thing I'd add is we have talked about, instead of tabling modules, what if they start at, approximately 3.5, 4 feet off the ground? So let's say 10 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they can operate normally.
Right. And we've also talked a little bit about, you can strategically graze on non-peak energy production hours. And really what this is, it's a partnership where we sit and we talk through each of these components. And what's so important is having a partner that recognizes that they need to compromise. They need to make some changes and adjustments, because you need to maximize both energy production and soil and forage health. So while not easy, I truly believe we're so close to getting there. This is another kind of glimpse of the test setup that we had at the Hua Reclamation Summit last year.
Those are actually 2,000-pound bulls. We kind of did that on purpose just to prove out that they're not gonna, take turns ramming the pile. Like I think Byron mentioned earlier, they rub on it a little bit, but yeah. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, there are other mitigation techniques. You've got the like the old street sweeper rubbing devices. My brain just shut down. I can't remember the name of them, but there's other means of trying to mitigate them or keep them away from those kind of sensitive structural components. All you, Brent.
I guess the other thing that's worth talking about is it's common to run what I would say yearlings is a common term in the cow industry. And so we can use smaller type animals, and it's a natural practice. It's already occurring. They're using rotational grazing that Josh mentioned, and a couple others I know Brad did. So that would fit well with the, local economies, and honestly, our torque tube height, our leading edge of our panels can be lower in that case. So different ways to graze cattle, different types of cattle.
Yeah, I think what was surprising to EDF and a lot of our senior management was just how many operations rarely get their cattle up beyond 500 pounds before they move off to be finished in another location. And it again, exposing folks to this level of information and with these strategic partners, it really does kind of reduce that kind of disconnect or demystifies both animal behavior as well as how these operations function. All right.
A couple of people have already mentioned rotational grazing, natural practice already occurring. Best for the cattle, it's best for the land, the grass. So we would continue that within solar. The right seed mix is also important. The microclimates that's created within the arrays can actually be beneficial to, especially when you have a good mix of warm and cool season grasses. That's obviously region dependent.
So that kind of concludes the presentation. I do have some frequently asked questions, but I figure maybe we can leave that to the more open forum. But I did want to highlight one that comes up, and I just think it's a great question. And I've had several folks say they're really not nearly as concerned about the impact to infrastructure. Biggest concern, and this goes beyond cattle grazing, is how do you build these projects in the way that you avoid soil compaction and some of the damaging things that are a result of improper seeding and poor grading that actually don't allow you to have forage in time to have these things be grazed, right after construction and post COD or right after COD. And I'm kind of leaving that to you, Brent, because I know that's kind of your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So I guess along those same lines, we're excited. We have 2, 3, 4 projects, utility scale projects that we'll have cattle on between now and the end of the year. So in the coming weeks, so anxious to get some of those, I guess, proved out, especially on utility scale projects. Also important to keep in mind that these systems were not designed for cattle or agrivoltaics at all. So certainly some retrofitting we have to do, but it's pretty minor. And so anxious to get those kind of under our belt. And then, yeah, just the whole vegetation management piece. I'm not here going to say that we can put cattle on every acre. However, if we, go in there with the right mindset, sheep, we're not against sheep. There's certainly areas where that makes sense. There's areas where cattle are going to make sense. And then there's areas where, hay and or some mowing operations need to take place. So I think having a plan, same with the cattle. I know, a few people have run into problems even with sheep, and that you have to have a herd health management. You have to have a plan where we're going to do this responsibly and not just go to the sale barn, throw some animals out there and hope it works. So
right.
Having a plan, and that's what's been exciting with EDF, working on some new designs that we're excited about.
Yeah. And then you mentioned mindset, and that was kind of symbolic of what I was trying to show through our photos here. You may be asking why we have 2. At EDF, as I mentioned, I started as a wind turbine technician, and now I'm collaborating on grazing cattle under solar. And, and this, you got Brent was starting out as a rancher, now is like at solar sites, really making a meaningful impact. It's really about recognizing opportunity, recognizing the needs of the local community, and trying to blend those 2 things together. There was one other slide. So if you want to see kind of like we did do some 3D visualizations, like, hey, I am very hopeful that designs like this are implemented in the very near future. And honestly, Byron, I'm so excited that you have the DOE able to talk about the LASSO program. What a great opportunity, because at the end of the day, we need to see it. We need to see it at scale. We need to feel confident that a lot of these questions that our internal teams are getting answered. And I'll leave it at that. Again, thank everybody for for listening, and I'm always happy to answer questions as needed going forward.
Thanks, Josh and Brent. I really appreciate you showing the different images of the sizes of cows. I think oftentimes people imagine that prize bull that goes for $1 million or whatever, that's going to be every single cow in a solar array, just knocking down pole after pole, and it's just not the case. I do hear a lot of folks in our community run yearlings. And then also, Josh, I know you said that EDF wasn't ready for this now. Man, I am. I'm ready to see more people get this done. So
Yeah.
with
Well,
that,
you know, yeah.
with that, I'm going to pull on Emily. And Emily, can you share screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Byron. And Brent, thank you for that introduction. I couldn't have asked for better. All right.
And
Can you
Emily
hear
is
me
of the
okay?
Emily is of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We spoke briefly about you chatting about the Lasso Prize. So here you are, folks.
Thank you, Byron. Hi, everyone. Like Byron said, my name is Emily Evans. I am a senior prize lead for American Made Challenges here on behalf of the Lasso Prize, which of course is the Large Animal Solar System Operations Prize. We do love our acronyms here in the government. Byron was so gracious to allow me for 5 minutes to come and just give you a quick little preview of the prize. I'm going to share a whole lot more resources where you can learn more about the prize. This is to just kind of give you a high-level overview. So the Lasso Prize is open now, and phase 1 will end in March. So you have to get your phase 1 submission in by March. We are offering $8 million in cash prizes. That's going to be spread across individual winners. But there are 2 tracks in this Lasso Prize for which competitors can compete. Track 1 is the standard track, and that's going to be for teams who are developing new cattle agrivoltaic PV projects, or teams that have a PV project or a PV array already built, but you're introducing cattle. Track 1 is for you. At the same time, we have a second track, the operating project tracks, and that is for teams that already have existing agrivoltaic PV projects already in place. So many of the presentations, that we heard from today would be eligible for this track too. Individuals can only submit to a single track. So if you have a project, you have to decide if you're track 1 or you're track 2, but you can be part of multiple submissions as long as the projects are different. Here's a quick overview, and I have shared these slides with Byron, so if you want to get a copy of the PDF, you are more than welcome to take a look at that. This is an overview of how this prize is structured. So in standard track, we're going to have a 3-phase prize. Phase 1 is open now through March. That's going to be 6 months. That's really just a concept paper. Tell us who you are, what your project is, give us some details, tell us why you are the right people to do this. And then if you get selected, you'll move into phase 2. Phase 2 is split into 2 separate subphases. Phase 1 is all about finalizing the design, the details, obtain permits, NEPA, making sure that you're ready to go to build. And then in phase 2B, you will actually go and build and energize your projects. Then in phase 3 is a data collection phase where we're going to ask you to submit your energy data related to your cattle every 6 months for 2 years. And every time you submit data, you will win another prize. For the operating project track, 6 months is phase 1. Again, same thing. Tell us who you are, what your projects are. If you get selected, you'll then go into phase 2, which is pretty much identical to the standard track phase 3. It's a 2 years of data collection. I should note that if you are interested in learning more about this prize, again, we're going to drop some links in the chat here, but you can scan this QR code up on the top right-hand side of the screen. At least it's top right-hand side for me. And that's going to take you to our HeroX page. At HeroX, you can follow the prize, get all the updates, make sure that you don't miss anything. We are also offering 2 bonus prizes, one for the largest PV system and a second bonus prize, which is for most valuable data. The LASSO prize is open to private entities, both for-profit and nonprofit, non-federal government entities, so state, local is all good as long as you're not part of the U.S. federal government, academic institutions, and of course, individuals who are residents or permanent, or citizens or permanent residents of the U.S. All teams must include both a solar developer and a rancher or farmer. And of course, we are encouraging multidisciplinary teams to apply. So if you're interested in learning more about this prize, a couple of tips to help set you up for success. One, follow the prize on HeroX. That's where you're going to get all the important information about the prize. That's where we host the rules document, our teaming resource. It's where you'll actually go and submit your phase 1 submission when you're ready. Second is read the rules. I cannot stress this enough. Read the rules. Make sure that you're comfortable with all of the submission requirements. Find a team. Again, this prize is big on teaming. Attend the informational webinar. That's going to happen on September 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You'll see these slides and lots more. We'll go into lots more depth about everything you need to know to be successful in the prize and in phase 1 in particular. And then, of course, submit your phase 1 submission by the submission deadline, which is March 6, 2025 at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you have any questions, please send them over to lasso.prize@nrel.gov. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to drop here and I won't be able to hang out for the rest of today's webinar, but I am available at this email and I would love to answer all of your questions. We will also take questions during the informational webinar. So that's all I have. Byron, if you don't mind dropping those links that I sent you into the chat so that people can kind of get around easily. And thank you all for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Done and done. Thanks, Emily. Appreciate you jumping on.
Hey, appreciate you.
All right, folks. If everybody could come back on video. I was thinking about just some of the questions that I've seen come through the chat, and plenty of the questions that I get on the farm when we talk about having cows and solar arrays. And I think Brent already talked about the different sizes of cows, which that's an important part. Next one is, what is normal cow behavior in a solar array? What have you all seen?
I think similar to some of the rest of you in that they just kind of hang out in the shade and really enjoy it. And I think there's been extensive research done about the benefits cattle get, especially during the summer months when they're in shade. Their rumens work better, their rate of gain's better, water consumption's less, all of those kinds of things. I know Brad and Steve could probably go on for a while.
Yeah, I think that's what they do. They graze, they stand underneath the panels to get out of the sunlight. One thing I've also seen is when they group there, you have a lot more fly defensive behavior. So if you have fly issues, controlling flies is one of the big things if they're underneath panels. Other than that, a cow does what a cow does, whether they're underneath solar or not. It's going to do the same thing.
We measured that the temperature in the shade of the panels was about 15 degrees cooler. So in the heat of the summer, it's an ideal place for the cattle.
Thinking on the fly behavior, Brad, do you notice that flies are more typically in full sun or in shade, or does it matter?
That you'll probably see them more in the shade because that's where the cows are congregating to get out of the sun, and then they're exhibiting behaviors because they're all in a group. They're all bunched together, so there's fly issues. But you see that whether they're out in the middle of the sun or underneath shade. So it's not necessarily a solar issue, but that's one thing that we noticed is you'll see more fly behaviors and cows moving around when they're in the shade.
It'd be interesting to follow that one, but our friends at Colorado State University have a project where they're monitoring insects within the grasslands and noticing that there are higher predominance of one type of insect directly underneath the torque tube versus out in between the panels. So I'd be curious about how other insect behaviors are around our various animal behaviors. But I always love asking people on our tours, like, what do you think the cow does right when it first gets here? And everybody's like, it pushes on the panels, it destroys stuff. And it's like, actually, the first thing they do is just put their head down and start eating. And it's just fresh forage. And that fresh forage idea gets me to something that Josh was talking about prior about how would you all describe the importance of having forage availability for cows in solar arrays?
Well, I think it's important. I think you need to have adequate forage there, or, you know, and for the cows to graze. Otherwise, they're just going to stand underneath the panels and probably, you know, stand there and probably create dirt and mud holes wherever you are in that situation. So in my mind, giving them enough grass and space to roam around, you're going to alleviate any issues with cows disturbing the ground, you know, kind of like the picture I showed. If you confine them enough and it rains, you're going to create a mud hole. So, you know, providing forage and enough space and grass is best, I think.
Byron, what I would add, even beyond forage for the animal itself, is establishing these grasses is so vital to the safety and integrity of our projects. You know, it is the means of protecting us from significant stormwater runoff. It's a means of, you know, it can improve keeping things cool under the modules, increasing efficiency, but honestly, just the overall ability to kind of build higher nutrient quality in our soils, all of it. It's vital to the long-term structural integrity of our projects, in my opinion.
Seed mix selection is important.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd add is, again, going back to herd health, we also have to consider, you know, what region we're in, and do they need, you know, mineral tubs, for instance, and kind of some supplemental, which again is typical in a grazing scenario, but we need to be mindful of that as well.
Steven, anything to add on forage? All right, then. I was thinking on, Brad, you mentioned adequate forage. What is adequate forage? Are you thinking about as what Brent was mentioning of different types of grasses, or like a overall dominance of the grassland? Because I see solar arrays where there's just large patches of dirt with a handful of sprigs of grasses. Like what would be an adequate coverage?
No, I'm probably talking, you know, 2,000 to 5,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. So a lot of grass, a lot of forage there. That's what I think is adequate for cows grazing, because then it gives them the opportunity to, you know, roam around the panels, things like that, and not create any disturbances. And whether that's, you know, cool season grasses or warm season, we've tried warm season grasses. They work well too. So I think it depends on, you know, where you're located and what grows best there. But I think, you know, it's not, I should say, I don't want to be a continuous grazing where you just graze it down to nothing and then have, you know, because then you'll get a whole bunch of weeds and other stuff that you don't want there. So providing enough grass keeps the weeds at bay and provides food for cattle. You need to have enough grass for the cows to graze.
Yep. I think one of the repeating question in the Q&A, and something that I always hear about, is how low do you think the panels can be to have cows safely within the solar array, so it's not damaging the solar array, it's not hurting the cow? I heard from you, Brad, that you have yours at lower edge of 6 feet. Steven, it sounded like yours were lower edge of 7.5 feet. Mine are 6.5 feet flat while I have them out there, and then I remove them before they get lower than that. And Brent, when I was out at your place, when you had those bulls, I think it was close to 5 foot at the lower edge. So what do we think? Like, it doesn't sound like anybody has had damage from a cow in a solar array as of yet.
Yeah,
So
Byron,
how low can we go?
what I'd say, you know, I don't know. Obviously, I think the big factor for me as a grid scale developer is just de-risking it for our other departments. But we work with a vegetation manager out in New York who is grazing 100 acres with Aberdeen cattle, fixed tilt, leading edge is less than 2 feet off the ground. thus far, and it's going so well. They have been doing a tremendous job of they've been doing a tremendous job of mowing with very little touch-up work afterwards needed. Absolutely no damage to modules. It's going so well that they're moving it into phase 2 where they're going to now be doing 200 acres. Is that going to be every project? I don't think so. I don't know, but I think it is it does represent that it is viable, even with some of these lower leading edges. Again, it's about making sure you have the right people managing it. If you just throw any random person out there, I don't think it would go so well.
I think, you know, if you're thinking lactating cows, milking cows, you know, beef cows, I think 6 feet is plenty. I think you can go lower depending on the size of the animals. You know, we go lower for sheep and nobody complains about that. So I'm not sure that, you know, cows aren't going to do anything different than the sheep do underneath the panels. So, you know, I think it's all about managing it, make sure the wires are up and stuff so they're not hanging, or just so the cows aren't, you're not giving the cows anything or any excuses to try and, you know, pull the wire. But, you know, I'm not sure that, you know, ours are higher, and I'm not sure that we need to have it at 8 feet, or I think it could be a lot lower. To sort of answer that question that, oh, well, this will increase the cost. Well, just put the panels up and put the cows in there. I don't think there'll be an issue.
I will also state that everyone I've talked to thus far that is grazing cattle at, you know, 8 feet, they all feel like it's overkill for the most part, and it's over designed, including the folks out at Grafton in Massachusetts. You know, they've had a great successful operation, but they just feel like it's too much. It's just not all necessary.
Stephen, any further opinion on that one?
I rotated the cattle, but my desire was, after I built this one, was to have the lowest part of the panels to be 10 feet off the ground. So you could safely move equipment in and out, no matter whether you were grazing or doing cropping. And people would say it would become too unstable, but if you make the space between the panel rows, you could put a brace between the rows to tie it all together. So I think the engineers need to get in and start thinking about how we can do this. Me, as a pseudo engineer from New Zealand, I can come up with ideas, but I didn't have the funding.
Well, you know, someone mentioned wires. That makes me think of what do you think is the most important safety consideration that we should be thinking about when integrating cows and solar arrays? Because that may not necessarily be the module height. It could be a variety of other things that go on a solar array site.
In our system, we ran all the wires across the top beam, so they never were exposed to animals. They were more than 6 feet off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure it's the wires. I think it's the inverters. What do you do with the inverters, and where do you put them? You know, if you don't have the luxury like we do, where you put the inverters on the outside of the fence, you know, how do you incorporate the inverters so the cows don't touch it? You know, that's, you certainly don't want the cows or anything to damage the inverters. So I think that's the bigger consideration. And I've seen some solar installations where, you know, they're fencing off the inverters or putting the cows in there. And how do you know, fence that off adequately, or what sort of structure do you build around the inverters to make that cow proof? That's what I think. I don't think it's the wiring at all. I think it's the inverters.
Yeah, on the wiring, when we had cows out here, I had a handful that were kind of strung a little bit too low where an animal could put their head. So we just threw some larger chicken wire around it. And I remember one cow licking the chicken wire and going, and then went back down to eating and left it alone. The other aspects that I've seen, and I'd be curious if other folks have this on our site. where the wires are going from under the panels to below ground to get to our inverters. Sometimes we have conduit that is maybe a foot away from a steel I-beam, or 6 inches away, or maybe even 2 feet away from I-beam. And then that just leaves space for an animal or for a machine or a hand or anything to be able to pry away that that conduit. So I always think that that gap space between where the wires are and the infrastructure is the what I think of as the highest risk. Let's see. I like this question that popped up. How can racking companies change their products to better support CattleVoltaics?
Dampers.
I think there's a variety of different tracking systems. Some are more conducive than others. Certainly, eliminating drive lines is beneficial. I know Josh mentioned that. Putting cab underground also helps. I'm not saying we can't do it with those in place. They just make it more challenging. And then the other thing with the SCADA systems and whatnot, being able to control those panels, like I suggested, where we could not go below 3.5, 4 feet, whatever it is we decide, so that they can operate normally from 9, 10 in the morning till 4 at night. That would be an improvement as well.
Yeah, and that adds value to agriculture beyond just cattle. I agree 100%.
Were any of you irrigating the grassland underneath the panels where you had the cows?
We actually have one we're working on right now, just a new construction where we're have designed an irrigation system. It's basically going to use drop nozzles similar to a center pivot. So won't be functional up and running until probably next spring. But so other than that, I have not. Other than our little test plots, but I'm not sure those are a good example of, utility scale type situation.
Figure in Minnesota and Massachusetts, you all get enough rain anyhow, so you don't have to worry about that part, right? Yeah. I've been considering flood irrigating the area where we have our grass. It's just complicated of getting the water out there. Are cattle selective grazers? Do you see them being able to be used over weedy patches to help control certain species?
Not like goats, no. I mean, certainly there's certain types of weeds that, at the right part of the growing season that cattle can get benefit from nutrients and whatnot from certain types of weeds. There's others that, they're not going to touch. So I think the key is with almost all those weed species, even the ones that are, favorable, is to have a management plan where you're grazing them before they get mature. Once they're mature, they're not going to touch them.
I think that kind of goes back to my providing adequate forage so the weeds don't grow, because then you don't have that. Because that we have found that if you let the weeds get up, then you have to go in and mow it. There's no other way. The cows won't touch it, especially in the Midwest here where we have to deal with thistle. That's they'll eat an immature one, but once it's grown out, you have to take care of that.
What do you think about bison being the future frontier of all this?
That might be a tall order, because I do think docility is a trait that we need to consider when we're deciding what animals we're going to put out there. And bison maybe don't have that trait as often as others.
Let me just say that all of this gray hair is the result of trying to convince EDF to graze cattle under solar. I may have no hair left should I try to push for bison. That's my thought. Although bison meat is delicious and I would love to see it happen. And again, keep in mind these massive solar projects, I don't know anything about grazing bison. There's often vast sections that are not used that solar developers still have to pay lease rates on. So who's to say if that isn't a viable opportunity for those kind of abandoned sections of the property.
Could be, or yearlings, like you'd mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, that.
But please don't ask me to try to sell bison. I love the idea. I'd love it, but
Josh, you look just fine being bald.
yeah,
So
yeah.
go for it.
Churing.
You can find me bison, I'll put them underneath the panels.
Right on.
Hey, there,
I was gonna say, if we're at 10 feet, maybe it's not so hard to sell.
Right, yeah,
there
right.
we go. Well, if we have any bison wranglers on here, send them to Minnesota. Brad will do it.
Carry on the bison thing. Our project, as I remember, it started with a bison farmer or holder who wanted to know if he could make hay between solar panels. He was going to have them pretty close. And I said, I don't think it's a good idea because you could run down there, get a biting fly in Massachusetts that would take your attention and you run into the panels and wreck everything. So that's my connection.
Fair enough. Well,
Which is
interesting that that's how it started for you. Did you all mix bulls and heifers? Someone is interested in if mating within a solar array would be an issue.
That's certainly been discussed numerous times, and we have not had males and females in the same array, but they would definitely ride each other, and so yes, some we would have to mitigate.
If we don't have any bulls in with our dairy cows, and dairy cows are riding each other all the time on pasture when you're in breeding season. So, you know, we haven't had any issues with that. We haven't really thought about it. I'm sure it could happen if a cow jumped up and tried to ride it. You know, they'll only hit their head once on the solar panel, but I don't think it'll really wreck it. I think once the cow hits it, she's going to back off quite quickly.
One thing to add into this is that there will be damage at some point as a result of grazing cattle. I am certainly not naive to that, but I'm also not naive to the fact that we have significant module loss as a result of traditional mowing and rocks getting kicked up. I know you look at the Baywa study where they transitioned away from traditional mowing towards sheep grazing, and it just like dramatically reduced the number of modules they had to replace on an annual basis. So my hope is that we'll find that to be somewhat similar when it comes to scaling cattle grazing. Again, I'm not saying there will not be issues, nor will there be damage, but we already have damage. I am not convinced it'll be significantly more.
I mean, we're ending our 4th season of having multiple acres of vegetable production with 1,000, 1,500, even up to 2,000 people per year coming through our solar array. We do not have damage from people with their tools or any of their machinery, and people can be just as damaging as animals at times if left alone. Let's see. Someone was, we were talking about tracking before. There's a question, can we do non-daily tracking like seasonal adjustments for lower cost?
We talked about that, right?
I'm not certain I understand the question completely, but some of the things we've talked about, I think that's along the same lines as, so if we do have to table modules or limit their tilt, we would try and do that in non-peak seasons where we would, during peak season, you stay out of there. We're producing energy at those times. And then maybe where the production isn't needed, that's when we would maybe limit the tilt. I'm not certain if that answers the question.
I think, we're in any grazing situation, you're probably not going to have animals out there year round. There's no point in having them out in that space in the winter time. You're going to have somewhere else for them. So tabling them if you're interested in tabling panels, it'd be only during the growing season, during the hottest season, I would imagine, when you put your animals out of the panels, and probably different sections would need to be tabled at different times depending on where the animals are being moved through. Let's see, is anybody collecting water off their panels? Somebody asked that one. We're not.
We're not
No.
either.
No, I'll just let that water go.
It's
straight
an
to the ground.
interesting
Yeah,
concept.
no, yeah. Well, I'm actually working with someone, professor at the University of the District of Columbia on an RFP, not on cattle grazing, but they've been looking into that. But I don't know of anybody doing it at any level of scale at this point. I can certainly reach out to him. Whoever asked that question, I can certainly reach out to him and connect them if needed.
Looks like this goes to you, Josh. How do you identify farmers for pilots?
How do I identify the farmers? I mean, it's kind of the standard. It depends on if it's like a behind the meters opportunity, if it's something we're injecting into the grid. It really is about capacity on the line, and is it even viable for a potential solar project to begin with? So that's always the biggest challenge. You know, a lot of folks want to engage in agrivoltaics and in this space, even solar, but the reality is their location is not within the proximity of getting this energy into the lines. So in general, it's is there availability, and is there enough land to meet the minimum requirement we would need to justify building the project? And then obviously a willing partner that we trust to be managing the project over the course of its life. I hope that's a fair answer. But yeah, unfortunately, oftentimes folks that want desperately to do these types of things are just not in a location where it's actually viable, and it's frustrating.
Another question. This one, I'm going to be surprised if anybody says yes on this. Has anyone measured the impact on production related to the albedo from reflection off of the cows or the land versus being ungrazed and mowed? I guess that would be bifacial panels, I'd assume.
I'm going to say no. And largely because I don't think we have scaled pilots or any of it really to test. From my perspective, I'm not sure if any of the universities have looked at that. And again, in the kind of concept we're looking at, keep in mind, you're not going to have cattle throughout the entire array every day, all year. So you're going to have to make sure you're kind of like taking that into account. Does anybody else know?
I've heard thoughts of people wanting to do measure albedo like off of raspberry leaves or off of other vegetation that's more out there for a longer period versus a moving animal. But even the leaves are constantly moving. Brad, how did you land on the 7-foot panel height? And can you elaborate more on your comment to raise panels to only 4 feet?
Okay, well, it was very unscientific. I went out, found the tallest cow in our herd, figured out all about, how far can she reach in the air, and that's where we put the panels. And it was about 8 feet, 7 to 8 feet. On one of ours, it was, so we decided to put it at 6 to 8 feet to see what would happen. But otherwise, that's how we did it. We found the tallest cow and figured out how far she could reach. But just, learning across, that 8 years or so that we've been doing this and seeing the cows, watching their behavior and seeing what they do underneath the panels, I'm not sure that I can't have a 4-foot ground mount and put cows under there because I don't think they'll bother it at all. I'm not sure that it makes any sense because you don't get shade from a sort of ground mount system like that, at least on a fixed tilt ground mount. So, but if it's shorter, maybe, at least in the dairy world that I work in, there's calves, there's heifers, you could put calves and heifers underneath shorter systems instead of lactating cows. I think it depends on what size animal you want.
Byron, one thing I know this was Brad's question. I'm gonna interject briefly. One of the reasons we landed around that 7-foot torque tube height wasn't just about cattle grazing. It's really about allowing for diversified agricultural operations long-term, because these projects are designed to be up 25, 30 plus years. Things change and farmers go through struggles. You don't know if you're going to be operating this thing in the same way 10 years from now. So we kind of landed at that height because it really did, from our perspective, offer that long-term diversification of agriculture.
Flexibility, yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Question for all of you as we wrap up. This will be the last one here, friends. Appreciate you sticking with me through it. I love talking about policy, especially around agrivoltaics. There's a gentleman asking about what advice would you give local policymakers, or we'll just broaden it to policymakers in general, about promoting agrivoltaics or helping this subset of an industry move forward. I'll give each of you an opportunity as you like.
So I work a lot with the policymakers. I know quite a few legislators. They know what we're doing here at our research center. And I think they like what we see, especially from a public perception in at least the state of Minnesota, being able to, utilize the land in multiple ways, solar and, in our case, cattle, is a win-win for them. And I think that's how it's going to get sold in a lot of different aspects in the US, is not just putting solar up on land anymore and taking away that dual use. So I think that's what we need to work with the policymakers to do, is that, and you hear it even in the US Congress, they're talking agrivoltaics in New York. So it's there, and I think that's what people want.
Do you want to
Go, you guys go.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, it's all you.
In Massachusetts, the project led to an incentive for people who would adopt agrivoltaics to get a better price for electricity. This is for installers. And so we've had so many people go through it.
You want to go?
So you would recommend that the policy that Massachusetts has?
Would I recommend that?
Yeah.
It was to encourage people, if you do it using agrivoltaics. I didn't get any of the money, so it didn't help me.
I feel you on that one. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Josh.
What I would say is that we got to keep our ratepayers in mind, and that we need to recognize that increasing the cost of electricity significantly has an impact on folks that already are struggling. So I have two parts to my answer. On the RFP front, when it becomes competitive, rather than necessarily having to add huge cost adders, offer huge cost adders that do in some ways drive up the price of electricity, create a platform in which, if a project that is committed to agri-PV comes within a certain range of strike price, that they get priority, that they will be chosen over those alternatives that do not. Because I think that adds value back into the agricultural community. It keeps electricity prices semi-stable. So that would be what I would advocate for. But on the legislative front, in some ways, I think one of the most important factors that we need to push for is for agrivoltaics to be considered legitimate agriculture. Once that's happened, I think a lot of the constraints, the red tape, the things that really complicate and make not only farmers, but solar developers not want to go through the hassle will diminish. And you'll see these projects become more popular. That's my gut.
I appreciate that sentiment. Brent, you want to tack on something?
Hey, I like exactly what Josh said, but yeah, certainly, incentives help, but just getting involved and doing what we're doing here. And it seems like there's quite a few people listening in. So I think that's all a piece of it as well. Just education all the way around. So.
Well, thanks much, gentlemen. This was our most highly attended webinar. I think I noticed 96 people at one point. So hopefully that helps you all with your outreach. But I appreciate you all joining us today. This webinar has been recorded. It will be up on our website in about a week. Thanks all. Thanks, speakers.
Thank you all. Appreciate everybody.
Have a good one.